Okay, should we start?
Let's do this.
Yeah. So first of all, welcome to all of you. It's great to see so many people who have taken an interest in the use of rubrics. Before we start, let's just introduce ourselves. My name is Malene Soenderskov, and I'm a consultant. I've worked with rubrics for the past 7-8 years, and I think very much so thanks to Savi, with whom I have worked in her former capacity as a grant maker, working in a foundation. So I think we could say that we have very much developed and explored the use of rubrics jointly, but from each our perspective and end. And I'm really happy to be able to share our excitement about and experiences with rubrics with you today. I'm based in Copenhagen and a partner in the Strategy House. Savi, over to you. A few words about you.
Thanks, Marlene, and again a very, very warm welcome to all of you. Very excited to see this interest, and I'm based in India, currently in the Himalayas, so also the internet could be a bit patchy, but I'm hoping that it'll log on. I've tried to manifest that. I'm an evaluation expert, working for the last 25 years. I was with Laudes Foundation till late last year. I've also had the pleasure of working very closely with Malene on several evaluations in different capacities. And at the moment, both Malene and I, with another set of colleagues, we are working together on an evaluation, a multi-country evaluation, in which we've also introduced rubrics. So very excited to talk to you about our experience. Personally, I'm also an aviation enthusiast. That's just a little bit about myself. When I'm not working, I'm probably looking at flight radar 24 where planes are going. So very happy to have all of you here. And we'll start, back to you, Marlene, with some of the practicalities that we have for you today.
Yeah. So the practicalities is that since we are excited.
The slideshow is not working properly, so maybe you want to switch screens so we can see full screen.
Let me just share it in a slightly different way then. The practicalities is that if you have any, we will start. Let me share in a slightly different way so that you can see this. Share the screen as. Is that possible? That one. You see the slides now, right?
Yes, but it's still in, I think, in PowerPoint format. So just screen share. Yeah.
Sheet it then like that. And it means I can handle it as well. So the practicalities for today is that if you have any questions during the presentation, please add them to the chat. The order of the webinar will be like this. We'll make a very brief introduction of what the rubrics are, and then share our experiences with both the pros and cons and difficulties and strengths and limitations of what rubrics can do. And then afterwards, there will be opportunities for Q&A sessions where you can contribute with your experiences and your questions, inputs to what you have heard. The session is being recorded and can be also shared and seen on the website afterwards. And there are a few articles we've done on rubrics, and if you are interested in those, I think they will be uploaded as well and available on the Global Evaluation Week website. You are also welcome to drop us an email. We will share our email in the chat and simply ask us to send them to you if you're interested afterwards. Anything I forgot, Savi, about the practicalities?
No, we're all good, but you can, like Malene said, you can also write questions in the chat as we go along, and then we'll also open the floor for question and answers and even your thoughts later on once we've really brought our experience to you.
Yeah. But before we start, we would like to know a little bit about you. So we have prepared a few Menti questions that you can log into by using either the code here or
Yes, and if you have a phone, you can also just do menti.com on your phone and either scan the QR code. And otherwise, if you're doing it directly via the website, you could also then just include the code, which I will also write here in the chat.
If you have done that, then I will stop sharing this part and go to the... Oh no, you'll have the Menti questions, of course.
No.
We'll just give another few seconds for everybody to join.
Yeah.
Vamos lá falando. Vou sentar com a boca fechada. Então, vou dar aqui os meus fones. Acho que ninguém está a falar também.
Great. I'll stop sharing this and go to the Menti, Savi.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we'd like to get to know more about who's in the room with us today.
Yeah. Here we go.
And we'll just shortly share the Menti questions as well.
And we are here. Should be here. Here we go.
Yes. So the first question that we have for you, just to get to know you better, is, are you currently involved in systems transformation work? You can select one of the 4 options.
Wow. That's a full time.
That's
a lot of
great.
people doing that. Sounds good. Proves well for the world. Could we go to the next one?
Just wait a few seconds and then we can go to the next one. And I just want to say, for those who are not sure, we can also hear from you at some point and also talk about what does it mean to be involved in systems transformation work as well. We can go to the next one, which is, where are you currently based? Where are you dialing in from? You can see that there's a lot from Europe, but also from Asia. And I think South America and North America are absent because of the time zone. And we realized that later.
Yeah.
And some also from Australia and Oceania. This is great.
Yeah.
Yes, it is way too early in South America, Oceania. And we'll come back to you, Anne, on your question on systems change. Let's go to the next one. So we'd also like to know what kind of issues and themes you're currently working on. You could select more than one as well. And if the ones that you're working on are not listed here, please do post them in the chat. There could be other important issues as well. These are just some of the few that we thought of including given the local theme of this year.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so there's a lot on equity and justice, which is systems change work as well. Road safety is very interesting. Linda, thank you for mentioning that. And then we have climate and environment, a lot on working on climate and environment, on community resilience, governance and policy. And all of these topics are really basically looking at the context that we work in, right? Okay, so great humanitarian work on protection and legal support. Thanks for mentioning that, Hefa, if I got your name correct. Great, good to see that we have a lot of interesting themes, a lot of expertise in the room as well. That's great to see. And we can go on to the next one, which is really to look at what sort of measurement or evaluation frameworks you're using. You could select more than one as well here. You could also not have a formal framework. That's also listed as an option, which is fine. And if there are any other frameworks that you're using beyond the ones mentioned, or in addition to the ones mentioned, you could also mention them and put them in the chat. Outcome harvesting. Most significant change. We do have a lot on outcome mapping as well. Project and impact evaluation, which is also very interesting. Yeah, there's also 4% on the rubrics. So we'd love to hear from those that have mentioned the rubrics or anyone else that has mentioned in the rubrics, and we'll ask them to also speak during the Q&A as well. That's great to see. And theory of change, of course, is 34%. Great. So you do actually have a lot of ingredients for rubrics. Let me just say that up front as well. Good to see this.
Yeah. All set to be merged into rubrics.
Yes, if you are willing to use them, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have one final question on the sort of challenges you face while reporting or measuring results. And these are a few again that we think are like the ones that are important or the ones that really a lot of people face, but we're also happy to hear from you from other sort of issues that you face. Please mention them in the chat. That's very interesting, Sanchukta, that you've prepared your own framework. So there's a lot. I think this is still coming in, but there's a lot on capturing complexity and nonlinear change. Attributing outcomes to specific activities. That's also very interesting to see.
Incomplete or inconsistent data is
the other
interesting.
one.
Yeah.
Time and resource countries. Sorry, go
webinar
ahead, Malene.
yesterday where one said, don't wait for the perfect data set. It doesn't exist.
And I also want to say that one of the reasons why we've tried to understand who's in the room is also because what Malene and I will speak here today about is also responding to a lot of issues and concerns on capturing complexity. How do we look at changes that are nonlinear? And this is exactly why we are speaking about the framework of rubrics and our experience with them.
And I would also say that the challenge of incomplete or inconsistent data, as you will see later, the rubrics provide a framework where you can really add different kinds of data that might be complementary, rather than having one set of data or having two distinct sets of data, quantitative or qualitative, that doesn't really speak to each other. So in total, they might help complete each other, supplement each other in a more full picture of the change that you're contributing to.
Exactly. So Malene, should we move to then really talking about the rubrics, what we're here to also
let's do
share?
that. That was an interesting input here from the audience. Let me share this one again. So Savi, over to you.
Yes. Great. So the rubrics, evaluative rubrics, are really a methodology that have been pioneered by Jane Davidson and Thomas Chianca. Both Malene and I have had the privilege of working with them very closely. And very recently, it's also been mentioned in blogs by Julian King. And I also want to say that it's not only, again, a few organizations that are using it, but we're also bringing to you who else are using rubrics besides the two of us here, Malene and myself. We have Loudest Foundation and its partners who use rubrics, Save the Children, SOS Villages International, the World Bank, UNDP, État Social, and also the David McKnight Foundation. And this is to say that donors are also starting to recognize, and which was also mentioned in the Menti, the limitations of really how do we measure complexity, how do we measure changes when it's happening in contexts that are non-linear, that are also very, very complex. And you would also ask us, Malene and Savi, where do rubrics really come from? Where do they originate? And they originate from nowhere else. And we can go to the next slide, Malene, is what we've all been very familiar with in schools. We got them as children. Now our children, nieces and nephews, get report cards. And what is great about a report card is it also gives an overall sense of performance. So that's one. But it has a rating scale. So you know where you are on the rating scale with relation to a specific subject. In my case, I was never good in math. And this report card has a A- in math. I would get a B-. And then my mom would send me off to tuition classes. It's only because the report card was able to help me and probably my mom understand where I'm performing in specific subjects. So measuring progress, but also gave me the opportunity to improve, to learn. And this is exactly what rubrics do, because they have a rating scale involved, is that they are treated as a measurement framework to measure progress and also to look at where can we learn and where can we improve. Now, what are rubrics really? And I'm going to be talking a bit on the conceptual side before I hand over to Malene, who will bring you the concrete, the experience closer to you all. In the next slide is really looking at what exactly a rubric does, moving away from counting what is easy to count, easy to measure, to measuring what matters. So, for example, and we all have, even in frameworks that I've worked on, we've counted the number of policies changed. But that really does not tell us anything about the kind of change that is taking place when the policy changes. How robust is the policy change? Is it regressive? Is it progressive? What is the scope? Is it national, global, or even local? And is it helping our work or is it not helping our work, right? Because this is the whole idea of being in systems change, is we should be able to also look at what is the quality of change that is taking place. And this is really where the rubrics come into play. They bring in the nuance on change, exactly how we've explained here, moving from number of policies changed as a KPI, as a metric that is used, to really looking at the evidence of the robustness, the scope, and the quality of the policy change. Now you would ask, Savi, so what are then the ingredient of rubrics? When we have to put together, if we have to put these two together, what does it look like? And in the next slide, I'm going to bring forward an analogy, which we've all become very familiar with, is the COVID-19 pandemic. And the rubrics really bring together a synthesis of mixed methods evidence. And let me use the analogy of the COVID-19 pandemic, as I said. And even at the moment, unfortunately, we have one variant that is very much a part of our landscape. But when an individual walks into a doctor's office and says, I think I have a Zoom and I suspect I have a COVID-19 infection, what does the doctor ask for? The doctor asks for what symptoms the individual has, because different variants have different symptoms, any existing health conditions or comorbidities that the individual may have, and then also would ask for hard data, which is the RT-PCR test, which is the gold standard for looking at whether the person has the COVID-19 infection. And based on the synthesis of both, which is done for a lot of health conditions, the doctor arrives at a diagnosis. So it's again a synthesis, which is important here, is a synthesis of both qualitative and quantitative information, is when the doctor arrives at a diagnosis, makes the interpretation, sets the treatment plan, and then also looks at how progress is tracked from there. So similarly, rubrics really look at how we are able to bring together the synthesis of qualitative and quantitative data, which we will also talk about in really, and I'll hand over to Malene here, on really what does this look like when we are bringing it in tangible, in concrete, in real world terms. Malene, over to you.
Thank you, Savi. So a rubric, an evaluation rubric, basically consists of three elements. There is the criteria. That could be satisfaction. If we're using your reporting scheme from the school, Savi, it could be the ability to do math without any mistakes. And then there is a standard, which can really be anything from a few steps to 5 or 7. I have added here an example from everyday life in Copenhagen, where the veterinary authorities go from shop to all the shops that are selling foods. They are rated against hygiene standards. So here the criteria is not satisfaction; it would be hygiene levels and ability to treat foodstuff in a responsible way. And then there are standards. You can see they are here formulated in terms of smileys. The very sour right smiley might be a situation where you would find a kitchen in a restaurant that is very messy. Rats might be running around on the floor, and food is not, hygiene is not properly cared for. whereas the very best standard would be a situation where there are very clear procedures and quality assurance guidelines to make sure that hygiene and sanitation is cared for on a daily basis. And then there are other standards in between. So first is the criteria. What is it that we want to measure in terms of satisfaction, in terms of hygiene, in terms of ability to master maths without any mistakes? Then there are the standards that would go from very poor to very, very good. And then there would be the descriptor for each standard so that we know exactly why is it that Savi has got a -A in math, or why is she now achieving an A+ in math? What does it take to reach or to belong to a certain standard? And you can develop the rubrics for literally anything. So as we saw in the Menti, you are all working in many different areas, and it's really about developing the standards that would be relevant to your particular setting. So I've here some. Yeah.
Malene, just a second. I think there are a lot of comments in the chat, which is also on my screen. So we can see you both, like you on one side and the slide, which has a lot of text. So you'll have to move to presenter mode. So
okay.
Only slide can show. We can give you a minute to do this.
Let me try again. I think I had the problem of not being able to move it but let me try this one. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just quickly ask, can you also go in presenter mode on your presentation? So not in Zoom, but in your presentation? That will be super helpful because then we can actually see it.
Let me try to do that. That's where I was struggling to see.
At the bottom. That works as well.
Let me see if I can move it then. Better?
No, the original one was better, I think. The one before this.
The other one was better?
Yeah, you can do the split. You can do the one on top, which has the. Hang on, I'm not fluent in Danish. It's the only.
This should be This
is fine.
The full one.
I think we can make do with this.
Is this one okay? Or is let me hear what you prefer. There's another one.
I think this is fine because we can read.
This one is better? Oh no.
Not this one, the previous one.
The previous. Okay. Like that. So an evaluation rubric consists of these three elements. What is it that we are measuring? A standard, which could really be, I think we would usually recommend a standard of 5 elements, because that gives you, on the one hand, nuances without it being too complicated and too detailed, and then a descriptor for each standard. And this is an example of what it would look like. This is from a child, SOS Children's Villages, who were working on a program linked on care levers, and the criteria we're using here to measure is let me see. That's the level of self-organizations of young people who have left alternative care. So that's the criteria. The standards, you can see, go from unsustainable to very sustainable. And then we have a description. So that's the descriptor of what the situation looks like if it's unsustainable or unconducive. That means if we have a situation where organizing of young care leavers is almost non-existing, to a situation down in the bottom that is sustainable, and the situation is so that we have very strong organizations of young care leavers who are able to defend their own interests and rights, and engage with policymakers and those who are allocating budgets to make sure that their concerns and needs are considered as well. And the added value of such a rubric is that it recognizes that change takes time. So you might not expect, especially if you're starting from scratch, you're trying to, as part of a climate change intervention or justice intervention, even to raise an agenda to make sure that people start speaking of, for instance, the marginalization of a certain population group. You might not expect to do miracles in 3-4 years. It might be a slow journey where you start from the very beginning, and there would be very few that are even recognizing you have a problem. And within 2-3 years, 5 years, you might have moved upwards or downwards in this rubric from a situation that is bad to one that is emerging, and there is a beginning recognition of a problem. And this is really what the rubrics are able to capture. So when you have rubrics at the same time, then the question arises, how are you going to figure out which part of a rubric you would belong to? And this is where, just as Savi said, we're doing like the doctor. We're using different kinds of evidence. So you might have quantitative data that is suggesting that you're belonging to, say, the very first standard, an unconducive standard. You might use focus groups to further figure out what is the situation in this case of the young care leavers. What do they themselves say about their organization or organizing? There might be secondary literature that you can use to figure out what the situation is. And you might also use field observations. So when using the rubric, you're really trying to merge all these different data to come into a warranted judgment of where do we belong. It's not like carved in stone. It's not 100% correct, you may argue, but it gives you a quite good hint at where are we situated when you merge all these different kinds of data and pieces of information. So that means also that the rubrics can help you, offer you a very easy way to communicate change over time. Here is an example from another kind of rubric where the criteria is a shift in power dynamics. That's one criteria, which could easily be a criteria for justice program, changes in narratives and discourse, where the baseline might be that there was actually power belonged to a very few people, and no one were really speaking about the issue. And within the course of the program, you might have moved from a situation that was harmful to a situation that was emerging. So now there are people recognizing that at least there is an issue that should be discussed. You might want to have more people mobilized behind this idea and this agenda, and that would then indicate, okay, if we are here, if we are now having a beginning recognition of an issue in our program, what does it take for us to expand that agenda and mobilize even more people behind the idea? And you can show that through these dots. So indicating there is a movement, this is where we are, and this is where we will probably want to move onto or progress to in our next program. So that is basically what a rubric is. And then I think it's time for us to talk about what are the experiences
Yes.
using rubrics, right?
Yes. And Malene, you very beautifully explained how rubrics show up in concrete terms. What does it mean for reporting progress using rubrics as well? I think my question to you is, what are some of the main concerns you've seen organizations and people have?
Yeah,
Sorry, can I ask all those who are unmuted to mute themselves, please?
I can just mute everyone.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I think the first concern that I have experienced is the issue of subjectivity, as you rightly pointed out, Savi. This is not just about one indicator or one figure. So I do see sometimes a worry that the rubrics might feel less objective than hard numbers and indicators, which might be easy to explain, but which often just give us a very small piece of reality, right? But since we're so used to the quantitative rubrics or to the quantitative data, that is often a concern. Another concern can be linked to that stepping away from these quantitative indicators, people might wonder if it's really sound or safe, especially because we are used to quantitative indicators and use them a lot. A third would probably be that since we are used to the indicators, that it might feel very complicated or burdensome to collect data to figure out where do we actually belong if we are to place ourselves in a rubric. But really, in my experience, a lot of this is about opening your eyes, listening to what people say, having these conversations and combining the data, which when you get used to it, is actually easier to make sense of than if you have to rely just on a few quantitative indicators. And then finally, and I really found that interesting, is that there is, because that says something about expectations in our sector, that there is often an anxiety that what if the assessment shows that we have only moved from harmful to emerging? Is our program then a failure because we haven't done a miracle, we haven't revolutionized the sector or ensured rights for everyone? I think that has to do with the way we are often used to formulate impact goals. That sort of creates an implicit expectation of how much we can really achieve within the course of a short-term program. So as a consultant, I think it's been not a challenge, but it's been a task for me to build trust in people that moving from a situation that might have been harmful to emerging can actually be a huge success. Well done. You managed to raise an agenda that no one else has spoken about. So keep up the good work. Yeah.
And thank you for saying that, Malene, because I also have realized working with rubrics, we also tend to see that systems change work sometimes, like you're saying, on very foundational pieces that take time. And then there is this appetite for short-term results that we were also mentioning in the Mentimeter. And it's the recognition that it takes time, right? And moving along the scale even slightly, you could also add, like is done here, is also arrows that it's harmful, but it's moving in the direction of emerging as well. But it's static and therefore it's harmful. So there are different ways also to show that scale. And one of the other questions that I have for you, Malene, is how do you address these concerns that have come up that you've mentioned?
But I think the first step is to embrace the fact that, yes, it might feel a bit different to work with the rubrics as opposed to indicators or one specific data collection methodology like outcome harvesting or most significant change or even quantitative indicators. What the rubrics invite us to do is to look at all these different results that we are creating using different methods, and then to ask how close or how far are we in terms of the ideal situation that we want to achieve, and what does it take to move us even closer. So if we are in an emergent situation, what would it take from us to move to the partly conducive or even a conducive situation? So I think it's a little bit to learn, like learning to ride a bike or ride a car. I mean, you have to practice, right? So usually what I would do is simply to walk people through the process. And that means that we start by defining jointly what the criteria and standards are. The criteria are, I saw a lot of respondents say they have a theory of change work framework, which is a great ingredient for a rubric, because that means you can take some of the preconditions in that rubric and in that theory of change and turn it into a criteria that can be measured according to standards. So I would usually start by co-defining based on what people have, the criteria, and then we discuss what are the standards within that criteria. And that is often a discussion that also entails a discussion about what is it that we really want to achieve, and what would the different levels of performance or the different levels of good look like. And then we think together about what kind of evidence would we need in terms of secondary literature or quantitative data, or outcome harvesting can also be used to really figure out where are we, where would we place ourselves in the standards that we have formulated. And from there, we can basically, it's a little bit like cooking, right? We bring everything together into a shared assessment based on the different kinds of evidence that is collected. And based on that, we can then also talk about what is needed. So now we've gathered everything, we realize we're in a situation that is emerging. What would it really take for us to move to that next step of progress? So in that way, the process sort of blends evaluation, figuring out how good is good, with strategic thinking and providing a direction. Just as you said, Savi, with your math, you are now on an A minus. What would it take for you or mom to be so proud that now you have an A plus, right? So yeah, it's about walking people through that process, but also building trust that even moving a situation from harmful to emerging can actually be a huge achievement on its own. Success is not just reaching a thrivable. I would even say if we reach the thrivable situation, that's where people should phase out and start to do something else.
And just to continue on your last thought is the sort of differences, just keen to also hear, Malene, on the sort of differences you've seen when, rubrics have been applied. I know you and I are doing this currently in the evaluation that we're conducting, but also very keen to hear from you on your reflections on what sort of responses have you got? What is the difference that you see?
I think probably, first of all, a different language. People start to speak about their work in a different way, in a way that encourages that deeper reflection, and also embrace the fact that no, our work is not perfect. I mean, we might have progressed, and we can be really proud of that progress that we make, but we're not done yet. There's still a way to go, and that might be a long time struggle, especially if we're working with systems change. So it's like moving away from just talking about what change occurred and what change did we contribute to, but also asking ourselves the so what question in terms of what does that mean in terms of the situation that we're trying to to achieve, and what does it take to move that process further? So it adds, I would say, an extra layer of reflection, and probably also an extra layer of appreciation of the fact that change can be difficult and it takes time. And the second, I think the second shift or difference is that it encourages, it adds more weight on learning as opposed to accountability. I mean, of course, I think the rubric system does embrace accountability as well, but when we start asking these questions about what's next, what does it take to continue the progress, there's a lot of learning and reflection in that, which I find personally inspiring.
And so what would
Yeah.
what would be then, Malene, your 1 or 2 reasons why organizations should, grantees also should adopt the rubrics? What would be really the reasons that you would say? You can give 1 or 2 or even more.
Yeah, I think especially if you work with complexity, systems change in situations where there's so many factors and actors that are contributing to change, and where it can be difficult to really predict causality, the link between cause and effect, then I think the rubrics offer a structured but at the same time sort of flexible way of communicating progress, which cannot be captured or hard to capture in a most significant change story alone or in quantitative indicators. So that you can say there's a thick description of the progress as opposed to many other approaches. And then perhaps more importantly, it gives us that framework to think ahead and ask, what does it take to move from one step to another? And then I think finally I would say it doesn't really replace any of the other tools. It sort of builds an umbrella above them, and as such it's complementary, because we can still use outcome harvesting, we can still use most significant change, literature review, quantitative indicators to figure out where are we in that rubric. So as such, I would say, if I should summarize, I would say it's a sense-making tool that complements the other tools.
And I would completely agree, Malene. Yes.
Great.
Yes, having
then-
used rubrics.
Let me ask you, Savi, because you have worked with the rubrics from a grant maker end, where I've been more at the other end, so to speak. So why do you think that grant makers should take an interest in this?
And that's a great question, Malene. So I think there are 3 reasons in my view. I think the first one you've also mentioned when you talked about why grantees should move to rubrics is really if the vision or slices of the work that grant makers and donors are doing is focused on systems change. And by systems change, and this is a question that came up earlier in the Menti, by systems change we mean change that is not predictable. When we're working on climate, which is also what Sanjukta is talking about, I mean, it's not predictable, it's not linear, it is emergent. This is really where you have the rubrics as your go-to measurement framework. And I say this because of several reasons. I think one of the reasons is that when we have projects like a vaccination project, a project that is building school infrastructure, we can see that change is linear, it is predictable. You can get a KPI metric to very reasonably measure that, and we can leave it at that. But when the work is evolving, when it's emergent, that's where the rubrics shine, because rubrics are context sensitive, and that's what really changes the whole game in measurement. Is we're looking at how then the organizational strategy or the donor strategy is working relative to the context that we are operating in. relative to also the complexities that we are working in. So as a donor, when the move is made to systems transformation work, I think that is key. And we can see that a lot of donors, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation a few minutes back, is also the different grant makers who are now using rubrics, because they're also giving a shared language. And I can see a lot of questions in the chat about how do we define rubrics. It's shared language on what good looks like. Vis-a-vis what an indicator could be interpreted differently. But this is really where the rubrics come into play is, you know, this is our shared definition of success. It can come from your theory of change. Like Malene is saying, you already sometimes have the building blocks of what it will take to build rubrics. And I think the other side is that systems change takes a sort of different sort of planning when you're looking at measurement, which is also what I just mentioned, is we need a framework that helps us look at, are there early signs of change? Again, Sanjukta was mentioning wins. Are there early wins? Will it take time? Do we need to be in this for the longer term as well? Is it the sort of recognition that I think donors have as well? And then the other side is on reporting as well. I think often donors ask grantees or partners for, you know, KPIs, hard data, but also side by side, listen, can you send us success stories? Can you send us your most significant change stories? We want to know where the result is. The board members are interested. And that's when you start, okay, then they're two separate pieces, right? But what if we had a system, a very compelling framework like the rubrics that brings in both a synthesis of qualitative and quantitative data, the hard data on the KPI metric, but also bringing in the sort of nuanced quality of change that is taking place as well. So I think that's the first reason, is if the vision and mission is, of course, on systems transformation, I think rubrics are the go-to framework. And the second is that they support learning. That's also what you mentioned, Malene. And they move away from accountability, because rubrics, while they help measure progress or really look at what are the early signs of change, they help us reflect, or donors reflect, on what sort of grant modalities work also. Is it about, you know, longer term grants? Do we need to be in this for long? Or is it core support grants, which is a conversation that I've seen a lot of donors have? And it kind of moves the grant making from, you know, like, are you meeting our expectations, to are we doing the right things right? So the posturing also changes. And this is where I think there's a lot of trust that gets built, which is the third point, is there's also shared understanding from what the partners, what the grantees are facing, the on-ground realities that they have to navigate. So rubrics would really be very well used when you are also having conversations as donors with your grantees. And this is why I think the rubrics really, really help build trust. It's because we say that we're in this together, we're learning together, we're seeing where is the so what else do we need to do if we need to make the change. To give you an example, if there is a change in labor law, and that is affecting the work of the partners, then the rubrics allow for a very honest conversation, because they're context sensitive. Hey, this will take more time, and that's okay. We may need a new direction, and that's also okay. So it moves the entire conversation from accountability to learning. You could call it accountable learning, like Lee Alexander Risby from Loudest Foundation calls it, is also accountable learning. And then the other side is looking at really the part of building trust, that you have a shared understanding of the complexities and the realities of what the partners are working on at the ground level as well. So I think those would be my three reasons for donors to move to rubrics.
Great. So if there are any grant makers here, what would you say? What does it take for them to introduce rubrics as part of their grant making and dialogue? Because it is a change. I loved your terminology, accountable learning. That is a move, huh?
Yeah. And I think this is a great question. It's not as easy as baking a cake. And I think that's also reflected in a lot of questions that are in the chat, like what does it take to even describe rubrics? I think the two non-negotiables in my view, non-negotiable ingredients, the first one is a mindset shift. A mindset shift moving away from accountability to learning. And I think that always what I've seen is comes from the leadership. It starts from the top. And there has to be also then a commitment to move to rubrics. So this mindset, yes, we will use this as a tool to monitor. Again, there's certain questions on the chat about this, is the rubrics also allow you to learn as you go along during the duration of the grant, during the implementation, not at the end, which traditional evaluations also help in. So the rubrics would allow you to sense make together, but they would also, like I said earlier, help donors to really look at their grant making modalities. Are we giving the partners and grantees the support we need to for the systems change goal? So you're reflecting then, and a culture of learning, building that with the grantee, plus doing that internally yourself. And what will it take for us to meet our strategic goals of systems change as well? So the shift is again from, are we meeting all of the fixed targets, which is traditional KPI based, traditional methods of measurement, and moving this to what is the sign of change that we are seeing, and what are we learning? Where is change happening and why? And then I think the second non-negotiable is, of course, complete organizational buy-in. That takes time. So buy-in, time, process, and resources. You could also introduce the rubrics, but then the Mull team, I think that's where the heavy lift happens, would really have to then coach the program teams, coach the grantees on how to use the rubrics. That becomes part of the proposal framework as well, the grant proposal frameworks as well. So we have to see also how do we embed rubrics into the organizational framework, buy-in, coaching, training, and also looking at the shared definition of success. You probably have to get together the first go and say, okay, here is what a shared definition of good looks like, that everybody has a buy-in to, and then develop the framework from there. So I think these would be the two main ingredients. Like I said, it's about the mindset shift, and you need a lot of courage to do that as well. So that's on the like the softer side, but on the hard side is really the organizational buy-in that needs to take place in the process and the resources as well.
So if you are to summarize that into 3 key tips, if you want to do this,
Hot tips. The hot tip, I think the first hot tip would be, don't get overwhelmed. This is not something that you have to reinvent the wheel on. Like we've seen earlier in the Mentee, a lot of organizations already or donors would have a strategic framework, a strategy, a theory of change, an existing Mull framework. If it's none of that below, is and I've seen that it also is fairly, I think, both easy and difficult to move to rubrics. If I have to work on a log frame and move that to rubrics, is because you're focusing on what change is really mattering, right? What is the most significant change that is taking place? So don't get overwhelmed. You can also pilot it in some of your programs. If there's a slice or a programmatic area which is looking at systems change, maybe you can pilot and see whether it's working and adapt as you go along. You may also want expert help. That's there too. I think my second tip, which I think both Malene and I have said repeatedly, is use the rubrics as a measurement tool and also as a tool for learning. I think that's very integral to the the framework of the rubric, the architecture of the rubric is the learning piece as well. And then thirdly is support your grantees, support the organizations. even if it's yourself, to support yourself in making sure that, you know, you have coaching, training, and if it's donors, is to make sure that also the reporting burden is not as high. And I'll give you an example of what one of the philanthropies has done is they basically looked at, they use the rubrics, but if there is a donor that was giving the financing prior to that philanthropy, the reporting template of that donor would be the primary reporting framework. But the second one would be the rubrics, which is a more lighter touch. So you really also then have to right size the reporting burden to make sure that that is also does not become as cumbersome, because the rubrics are about honest conversations that happen between the donor and the grantee. It's not really a report that I've got and I press the pay button and it goes into the MIS system. But it's more an iterative process of measuring change and learning so that we can adapt together and really, really move towards what we now know as value-based financing and also trust-based grant making.
Great. Thanks for that. So I think we should now, there's a lot of questions in the chat, is that so? I can also unmute participants, so
yeah, there are a lot of questions in the chat as
should
well.
Start from an end. I'll stop
Let me
sharing.
start with the first one, Malene. What is, and this is Sarah, what is the potential for using rubrics in monitoring as well as evaluation, especially in a context where partners have little time to engage in interviews in between the evaluation milestones, making qualitative data scarce? Can I take this one?
Yeah, you can start.
Yes, Sarah, this is actually a great question. So rubrics really are a good framework for both monitoring, looking at where we are, and supposing you have, and you can also come in to speak if you so wish, but supposing you have reports that are coming in from partners, you would then get into a conversation with them, which is also what really helps. And there, you could also develop certain questions around the rubrics on what is working. So are there early signs of change that we are starting to see, right? And this could be based on the rubrics that has been developed together with those partners as well. And this gives you then the leeway to build trust with the partners, but also having these conversations and finding time. Supposing you are on a field visit with the partners, that's also probably a time where you can have this conversation with them on how is it going, as well, beyond very formal check-ins as well, right? So it's to really look at using the rubrics as an opportunity and of getting curious. Yeah. And the evidence also then probably exists through the reports, I'm assuming. So
yeah,
just wanted to,
yeah, and thank you. Hi.
Oh, hi, Sarah. I didn't know it was you.
Sarah.
Yes, nice to see you.
Yeah, really interesting presentation. Thank you both. I think everybody here has learned a lot, and I can see in the chat it's been really buzzing with ideas. But yeah, it really your answer there, it just shows how important it is, even on monitoring work, to build in those touch points for qualitative information sharing. I think so often it can just be indicator frameworks. Here's the report, here's the data. But yeah, thank you for that.
I would also add, if you can create joint ownership to the rubric, field workers might also have a lot of information just by observing what is taking place. So monitoring is not just about formal data collection. It's actually also about opening your ears and eyes to what is happening on an everyday basis. So even if there is that little time for formal focus groups or key informant interviews, there are often people on board the program that has a lot of information that could feed into assessment against the rubric.
Thank you.
I think the next question is from Anne. Sorry if you said it, but how do you define different scales and the narrative behind each criteria? And I think there are other questions in the chat that relate to this.
Yeah. Should I take that? That's really about
Yes.
using your imagination. And I would say it's so if a criteria could be to make sure that there is a political support for a certain idea, then you might simply ask yourself, so what does the worst case scenario look like? That would then equal a very harmful situation. So a worst case scenario in a situation where you want to create political support for a certain idea could be, for instance, that there is a denial, that there is a problem at all, there's a lot of resistance, there is silencing of people who are trying to promote this certain agenda, etc., etc. So I would basically start with the extremes, asking what is the worst case scenario and what is the dream scenario, which would, in our rubrics of 5, equal a thrivable and sustainable situations. And that could be that there is now a widespread consensus among key policy makers and opinion makers in a society that yes, this is an issue and we should really work to do something about it. And then you have the situations in between, right? And you can consider yourself, what would be the role of the media in these situations? What would be the role of decision makers, of key opinion makers like religious leaders, etc., etc. So it is about using your imagination based on a combination of common sense and experience, and as Savi said, inviting the different stakeholders so into that conversation of what good and bad looks like is really useful, because that also helps create a common language of what is it that we're really trying to achieve and what does good look like at different stages.
Yeah, and just very quickly to add to what Malene is saying is, and this Julian King has done very well in a blog, is, rubrics at different levels. Different levels means you could have rubrics at the organizational level, which are broad and generic, that encompass basically the entirety of the grant portfolio. And this is co-developed generally for ownership purposes as well, but to make sure that, it's also broad enough. And then the second is you could have it at a program level as well, right? And also at a project level. So program, I mean portfolio as well. But use, I think, the strategic framework, the goals, the objectives of the organization or the program or the project to really steer the direction of the content of the rubric descriptor, as we would say it, and then juxtapose that to the context as well. I think that's key. How would we see change occur if the context was supportive, for example? How would we see if it was harmful? And this is really key to the rubrics, is making sure that the context comes into place so that you're able to really look at how the context is helping organizations or programs or not. And that really is about then what sort of, do you need to increase your speed? Do you need to have different approaches as well? Or is this okay for now? So it also gives the learning on what else needs to be done. And we could also share with you, I'll try and find Julian King's blog and share that with you on how to define scales, but I will also share Lauda's Foundation's rubrics, but that's at the organizational level as well, for the descriptor, right? And I think The next question is from Beatrice. For a typical program in an organization, how many criteria would you suggest we use? Great question. That I also got asked a lot when I was working in a foundation. So you would really look at what are the most valuable changes that the program, a typical program, would intend to contribute to, and use those as the markers in the rubric as well. So ideally, a rubric framework is supposed to be shorter than a log frame that counts everything. So the rubrics would only look at what is the most significant and the most valuable change that a program would contribute to. So I would keep the criteria to a minimum, but keeping the number equivalent to the kind of changes you're expecting to see, most valuable changes you're expecting to see. So the higher order, let me just say that higher order in our Mull language.
And Savi, it might be important to add here that if we are talking about rubrics at programs or organizational level, we can also consider the criteria a kind of buffet. So you might have grantees who are not responding to all the different criteria. And they should, of course, only be measured or assessed against the criteria that they are contributing to, which I think is also what the Loudest Foundation did beautifully. So grantees were asked to say which of these criteria does your intervention contribute to?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Going back to the chat, sorry, I was typing, so I lost the trail. Give me 1 second. I think next one is from Suzanne. Very interesting. I'd be curious to hear more regarding how, following the consideration across multiple sources for the rubrics, how the criteria and descriptors are finally decided upon within an evaluation situation. Are you aiming to establish ownership of the rubric with the client and other stakeholders too? You want to go first, Malene?
Yeah, ideally, yes. I mean, we are measuring what matters, and what matters is what the client and stakeholders are trying to achieve. So, and I think that goes with any evaluation. It's so important to create ownership to the findings, because if not, I think your evaluation is going to end on the shelf without really being used. So I think what we are doing, and we actually we are working on exactly that right now with a client.
Exactly.
Is to try to, they did not have rubrics at the onset, but we realized with the evaluation requirements that were in the terms of reference, it would be so important and useful to have rubrics to summarize all the different kinds of evidence that they are asking us to collect. So we are working with the client right now to try to formulate rubrics that they can see themselves in and which they find useful, given also the work that they have done. And I consider that process absolutely key, because in that process, the result of that would be that it embraces as well what is in the terms of reference, but also their own understanding of what is important in the program that they have been implementing.
And the other thing is, let me also come to a challenge that we face. We've recently faced with like introducing rubrics is it's a multi-country program. The countries are doing very different work towards the same goal. So the one country would partnership would ask us, but that's not included. Our work is not included specifically and explicitly in the rubric. And we have to explain to them that the rubrics are broad and generic, and they would cover the entirety of the, like the consortium, but it would not specifically speak to one part of the change or the specific language of the change that the country would be looking at. Because we also have to remember that we need to go back to the theory of change that was put together. So use the existing measurement frameworks, where the definitions of outcome and change are, and also use that to create ownership, because sometimes we have to remind, that's the other thing we have to do, is as evaluators, we also have to remind that if in a 5 or 10-year program, there has been recalibration, but the goalpost starts from the first point of the development of the theory of change, which also includes the changes, but we also have to remember to keep the measurement framework consistent to what it was originally intended. Okay, the next question alongside this rubric, how do you write about this progress of change and the arrows, as Savi just mentioned? What room is there for nuance in the factors leading to dash versus thick arrows, for example? I can give you a clear example before handing over to Malene, and this was in one of the evaluations that I managed. It got rated very highly because certain brands who had never done this before introduced a premium to pay to organic farmers that were part of the program. And this was a 1-year sign up with the brand. So my question to then the evaluators and the program team was, this is a one-off change. So this means that if this is a one-off change, you would essentially have then a static rubric saying that this is just starting to move. What is a thicker arrow then would be that a few of those brands have introduced or signed up to committing to pay premiums every year. That's sustained behavior change. And that's what systems changes, is they're moving their business as usual to something which is different. So they would start moving, and here is the nuance, right? This is the nuance on really what the description would look like, and where you would have a thinner arrow or a thicker arrow. That change is starting to emerge as well. In a project orientation, the evaluation would have said, this is a complete success, that the brands have done a one-time payment to all of the organic farmers. But in systems change, they have to do it year on year. They have to change their behavior and their practice.
And I may add, when I use the rubrics for reporting, I would present all the evidence from the different kind of data that has been collected. In Savi's case, the example of brands making this one-term payment, but also the fact that this is exactly just a one-time payment. So there's no guarantee that it would happen again. And there might be other data that is suggesting where, or that would provide that warranted argument as to where is it that we would think we belong within that rubric, right? So we use the evidence to argue we think we belong in a situation that is emerging, but that is, of course, also an issue that can then be discussed between the different stakeholders. Do we think that this piece of evidence situates us in this particular standard, or is there an argument for moving that into another standard? Should we
I'm
move
going back. Yes.
Can we make
I think
room for another one or two, and then?
Yeah, this one is a very good one, because I think we went to Jane and Thomas with this question on how do you aggregate results from separate partners, and we're going to do that in the current situation as well, Malene.
Yeah.
If each partner fills in the grid like this, and we have 9 partners in a country, how to aggregate the report on the country level? What do you suggest? Do you want to start first, Malene?
Yeah, in the evaluation we do now, I think we are applying the rubrics both at country level and at overall program level, right? So we might have a few countries that, for different reasons that has to do with the context, have progressed more than others. And when we're summarizing the results from all these different countries that are in the particular evaluation we're working on now, you could say we get an average, right? we would say based on the results from country A, B, C, and D, the average is more or less here for the program as such. So that, I think that would be my answer. And when we present it, we would have both the results from the individual country, but then, and in your case, Lana, the results from individual partners. But when we look at it in totality, we aggregate everything and say, this is sort of the average result when we look across the line and from a systems systems lens, sorry.
And just to, I think, clarify what Malene is saying about average, what we've seen in the use of rubrics is you'll have the 9 partners and you would have the scale, right? And you would say 4 partners are sitting here. We do not average the rating, like do 1, 2, 3, 4. We do not do that because that is really not doing justice to the kind of changes that are taking place in different countries. So first of all, we would look at, for example, we would have 4 partners that are continuing to state harmful because of the evidence. There could be others that have moved to emerging, the next level, and there could be 1 or 2 that have moved to conducive for certain reasons that the evidence is showing. But what you would also then describe in the evaluation or in the data is really looking at what gained the biggest traction. Where did that happen and why? So you again using rubrics to learn and looking at what else needs to be done with those that we need to shift them slightly more, or how does that happen? Or will it take long, and recognizing that as well, and which is okay. So it's to say that we also recognize where the changes are taking on a broad brush as well, and then come to where specific countries are moving the needle or not, and why, and again getting curious about the why. Then there are a few questions which are again on the description, which I think we've answered. And I think just to mention, Sanjukta, your question on thrivable and sustainable, they may mean the same, they may not, depending on the criteria you're developing. But what happens is you'll see that the differences between the last 2 rubrics that are conducive and thrivable are also quite significant, but they also create distinctions between what really good looks like and success looks like as well. Yes, so we have one from Cecilia, and we'll take this one, and then maybe we'll have to get back to others on the questions that they have. There are many in the chat.
Yeah, I think what we could do, since time is running out, have one more question, and then we have one question for you about the main takeaways. And I think if we add our emails to the chats, you are more than welcome to reach out if you have any other questions. Is that how we should go about it, Savi?
Yes, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. So last question, will you read that aloud?
Yes, there are a few that I missed. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm missing out a few in the middle, but coming to one that is written here, Ibukuno Lava, if I've pronounced your name well. Thank you for the great presentation, Malene. I work with an agriculture consulting firm, and I'm trying to connect the ideas you have shared to the realities encountered in agricultural projects. One area I would appreciate more clarity is on how to capture softer but critical outcomes in agriculture. For instance, like the trust built between farmers and extension agents. These are often intangible and hard to quantify. How would you recommend incorporating these kind of outcomes into an evaluation rubric in a way that avoids oversimplifying them, but still allows them to be meaningfully assessed? Such a great question.
Fantastic question. I mean, the criteria here is trust. So the first thing is that you, as far as I hear the question, the first thing you would do is then to develop the standards. They could be 5, for instance, and then make descriptors for each of these standards in terms of a situation that is the worst case situation. There would be absolutely no trust between the 2 parties, and farmers would not be able to reach out. They might even hide if anyone approaches them. They might be lying or disclosing information out of fear. And the best situation is that they proactively addresses those who are supposed to support them, and that there is an ongoing discussion and dialogue about how to improve their livelihoods and situations. And then you have situations in between. And I would say have a conversation with the field staff about their experiences, because they would know what trust means. So they would be able to feed you with information as to what would these different descriptors look like if you have, for instance, 5 standards from a situation that is really harmful to a situation that is excellent. And then in terms of data collection, you can use observations, you can use focus group discussions with the farmers to talk about trust if you want to figure out where they're situated on that scale. There might also be quantitative data that you can collect that could help you figure out where you placed.
Great. I have nothing else to add.
Okay.
Malene.
Thank you,
Yes.
Malene. That was
Pleasure.
clear.
Great. Let me just add our emails here, and then we have a final question for you.
Which we can ask in the chat, Malene, I think, for everybody who's here.
Yeah,
They
we can
wouldn't have
also
to go
do
back
that.
to Menti.
Yeah, that might be easier.
Yes. Yes.
So the
I
question.
think for those who are here, yeah, go ahead, Malene.
Oh, no, you can ask it.
Yes, and again, thank you for those who are still here. We would love to know from you, what is the one aha moment or aha message that you got from this session? We'd love to hear that from you, and you can write that in the chat, please.
Yeah, that's a great one. Rubric is a sense-making tool.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, yeah. Same, yeah. Great. Seems we got our message through. Meaningful tracking of progress and ownership. Yeah, that's a key one. Sure.
That's a very key one, yeah.
Yeah. How to phase out and clarify goals.
Yeah, shared language.
Yeah, another really important one.
I think shared language is also very, very key.
Yeah.
It takes a while, but it's worth the while.
Yeah.
To have that shared language on what good looks like.
Yeah. And just for measuring fixed out. Yeah, great.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Continuing to draw on whole range of good evaluation. Yeah, great. Yeah. Yeah, it's not an either or. This should be used in combination with other data collection methods.
Any final thoughts?
Really thinking through what makes up systems. Yeah. Great one. Excellent. Great.
Cannot think of how but the role can be used and how it can happen across evaluation and learning. Yes. And Ritika, great to see you here. Thank you for coming.
Yeah. And good luck with the rubrics.
Yes, if any of you need help, you know where to find us. We're also on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And
thank you for a great webinar. It's really, really informative.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the great session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.